The Kugo, Japan's ingenious wartime weapon development. As American forces drew ever closer to the Japanese home islands in 1945, Japan's weapons research took on an increasingly desperate character. Resources were scarce, skilled personnel were being drafted into combat units, and strategic bombing was disrupting supply chains. Despite these challenges, Japanese engineers continued to develop weapons of astonishing ingenuity, many of which remained unknown to Allied intelligence until after the war. One such project was the Kugo, Japan's attempt to create a death ray. Inspired by rumors that British radar research had accidentally killed a sheep at significant distance, Japanese scientists began developing a microwave weapon they believed could disable aircraft engines or even kill air crews. In an isolated facility near Mount Fuji, massive magnetron tubes, the same technology used in radar systems, were adapted to focus microwave energy into a directional beam. Dr. Hideo Itokawa, later famous as the father of Japanese rocketry, was involved in the project and later recounted, "We were operating on the very edge of scientific knowledge. None of us knew if the weapon would function as theorized, but the potential to clear the skies of B-29s justified any resource expenditure." The Kugo team eventually constructed a prototype device with a parabolic reflector measuring 20 feet in diameter. Testing against animal targets showed promise at short ranges, but the power generation technology of the 1940s simply couldn't produce the energy levels needed for a truly effective weapon. Nevertheless, the project continued until Japan's surrender, with scientists hoping for a breakthrough that never came. What makes the Kugo remarkable isn't just its science fiction-like concept, but how it anticipated directed energy weapons that wouldn't become practical until the early 21st century. Modern anti-drone microwave systems operate on principles remarkably similar to those explored by Japanese scientists 75 years earlier. At the same time, Japanese researchers were exploring directed energy weapons. Other teams were developing technologies that could have revolutionized aerial warfare. The Mitsubishi Ki-167 Sakura-Dan represented Japan's most ambitious attempt to create a precision-guided smart bomb. The Sakura-Dan was essentially a medium bomber converted into a flying bomb with enhanced guidance systems. Unlike the simpler Oka, which relied entirely on its pilot for guidance, the Sakura-Dan incorporated a sophisticated autopilot system and radio command link. A mother aircraft would guide it to the general vicinity of the target, then a pilot would take control for the final approach. What made the Sakura-Dan unique was its standoff capability. The pilot could aim the aircraft at its target, lock the controls, and then bail out before impact. This addressed the critical weakness of Japan's kamikaze strategy, the loss of trained pilots with each attack. Lieutenant Commander Eiichi Iwaya, who helped develop the Sakura-Dan's guidance systems, explained its potential impact. The Americans had grown accustomed to kamikaze tactics and were developing effective countermeasures. The Sakura-Dan would have been a shock. All the precision of a manned attack, but without the psychological predictability of a suicide mission. By August 1945, 3 Sakura-Dan prototypes had been completed, with pilots in training for an operation against American naval forces expected to support the invasion of Japan. The surrender order halted this program before the weapons could be deployed in combat. Perhaps the most ambitious of all Japan's superweapon programs, and one that came closest to changing the course of the war, was its nuclear weapons research. While conventional historical accounts suggest Japan lacked the resources and scientific infrastructure to pursue atomic weapons, declassified documents from both Japanese and American archives tell a more nuanced story. Japan's nuclear program, codenamed NIGO, began as early as 1941 with the formation of a committee of Japan's leading physicists under the direction of Dr. Yoshio Nishina. Unlike Germany, which pursued several different approaches to nuclear fission simultaneously, Japan's limited resources forced them to focus on a single uranium separation method using thermal diffusion. In the mountains of occupied Korea, near the Chosin Reservoir, Japanese engineers constructed a facility for uranium enrichment that remained unknown to American intelligence. Dr. Tatsusaburo Suzuki, who worked at the facility and was later interrogated by American occupation authorities, revealed, "We were making progress, but at a rate far too slow to affect the war. Had the conflict continued another 3 to 5 years, we might have produced a workable device. But by 1945, we all recognized this was a project for a war we were already losing." What prevented Japan from advancing further wasn't a lack of theoretical knowledge. Japanese physicists understood nuclear fission as well as their Western counterparts, but rather the enormous industrial infrastructure required for uranium enrichment. In a country where basic resources like aluminum and rubber were becoming scarce, diverting materials to a long-term project like NEGO became increasingly difficult to justify to military leadership. Yet the program continued until Japan's surrender, partly because Emperor Hirohito himself had expressed interest in its potential. According to Imperial Palace records declassified in the 1990s, the emperor received 3 briefings on the nuclear program's progress in 1944 and 1945, indicating its importance despite the resource limitations. While these weapons and concepts represented the cutting edge of Japanese military technology, the most surprising aspect of Japan's superweapon programs was how they were connected to post-war technological developments. Many of the engineers who worked on these secret wartime projects went on to help create Japan's economic miracle in the decades that followed. Dr. Hideo Itokawa, who worked on guided missiles and the Kugo death ray, later became the founder of Japan's space program. Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero fighter, helped establish Mitsubishi's aircraft division that now produces components for Boeing and Airbus. The automotive giants Toyota and Honda benefited from expertise gained in crafting high-performance aircraft engines. The end of hostilities didn't mean the end of these technologies. It simply redirected them toward peaceful applications. American occupation authorities, recognizing the value of Japanese technical expertise, deliberately preserved much of Japan's scientific and engineering talent, even those who had worked on the most destructive weapons programs. General Charles Willoughby, head of intelligence for the American occupation forces, noted in a 1946 report, "Japanese technical personnel represent an asset not just to the rebuilding of Japan, but potentially to American interests in the emerging conflict with the Soviet Union. Their expertise in miniaturization, fuel efficiency, and novel propulsion systems may prove invaluable in coming years." This pragmatic approach helped facilitate Japan's rapid recovery and eventual technological dominance in many industrial sectors. The same ingenuity that had created submarine aircraft carriers and rocket-powered interceptors was channeled into consumer electronics, automobiles, and precision manufacturing. Yet for all their technical brilliance, these superweapons ultimately failed to change the outcome of the war. Why? The answer lies not in their design or concept, but in the fundamental strategic situation Japan faced after 1943. Admiral Somu Toyota, who served as the final commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, provided perhaps the most insightful analysis. "Our superweapons suffered from what I call the desperation paradox. The more desperately we needed them, the fewer resources we could allocate to their development. By the time we recognized their necessity, our industrial capacity was already too damaged to produce them in meaningful numbers." This paradox was evident across all of Japan's advanced weapons programs. The I-400 submarine was a revolutionary concept, but only 3 were completed from an original plan for 18. The Kikka jet fighter flew successfully, but production facilities were destroyed by bombing before serial manufacturing could begin. The guided missile programs demonstrated promising results in testing, but material shortages prevented mass production. Dr. Hideki Yukawa, Japan's first Nobel Prize winner in physics who consulted on several military research projects, later reflected, "We had the knowledge to create truly revolutionary weapons, but lacked the industrial base to translate that knowledge into military power. It was like having the architectural plans for a magnificent building, but only enough concrete to build the foundation." This mismatch between technical capability and industrial capacity highlights a crucial lesson that remains relevant today. Technological superiority alone cannot overcome fundamental strategic disadvantages. Japan's superweapons, for all their innovation, could not compensate for American industrial might, resource advantages, and strategic initiative in the later stages of the war. The story of these weapons also forces us to reconsider conventional narratives about technological development during World War II. The standard account often portrays the Allies, particularly the United States, as holding an insurmountable lead in advanced technology by 1945. The reality was considerably more nuanced. In several key areas, submarine design, aircraft propulsion, missile guidance systems, Japan had achieved breakthroughs that matched or exceeded Allied capabilities. Had these technologies been developed earlier or produced in greater numbers, they might have significantly extended the war and increased its already terrible cost. This possibility wasn't lost on American military planners. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, reflecting on captured Japanese weapon technology after the war, remarked, "Had the Japanese been capable of employing these weapons 18 months earlier and in substantial numbers, our casualties and losses would have been significantly higher. We might still have won the war, but the price would have been considerably steeper." This assessment was shared by strategic bombing survey analysts who examined Japanese weapons research facilities after the war. Their classified report, only declassified in the 1970s, concluded, "Japan possessed the technical expertise to create weapons that could have seriously impeded Allied operations had they been successfully deployed." The limiting factor was not Japanese scientific capability, but the erosion of Japan's industrial base through strategic bombing and naval blockade. The most fascinating counterfactual scenario involves the planned invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall. Had the atomic bombings not prompted Japan's surrender, and had the invasion proceeded as planned in November 1945, many of these superweapons would have seen their first major deployment. American troops landing on Japanese beaches would have faced rocket-powered kamikaze aircraft, guided missiles launched from inland sites, and coastal waters potentially filled with human-guided torpedoes and high-speed attack submarines. While these weapons likely wouldn't have prevented an eventual Allied victory, military historians estimate they could have inflicted casualties several times higher than those suffered at Iwo Jima and Okinawa combined. General Douglas MacArthur, who would have commanded the invasion forces, received intelligence briefings on Japanese weapon developments in preparation for Operation Downfall. His intelligence chief, General Charles Willoughby, later wrote that these reports gave the general serious concern about potential casualty rates, particularly from the unconventional weapons Japan was preparing to deploy in a last-ditch defense. The Japanese superweapon programs represent one of history's great might-have-beens. They emerged too late to alter the outcome of World War II, but they provide a fascinating glimpse into an alternate technological timeline, one where desperation and necessity drove innovation at a breakneck pace. Today, few physical remnants of these weapons survive. After Japan's surrender, occupying American forces systematically dismantled many of the research facilities and either destroyed or shipped back to the United States the most advanced prototypes. The I-400 submarines were studied extensively by the U.S. Navy, then scuttled off the coast of Hawaii to prevent the technology from falling into Soviet hands. The Kika jet aircraft were cut up for scrap, with only a single partially restored example surviving in Japan's Gifu Kakamigahara Air and Space Museum. Yet the legacy of these weapons lives on, not just in military technology, but in Japan's broader technological development. The miniaturization expertise developed for cramming aircraft into submarine hangars later influenced Japan's consumer electronics industry. The precision manufacturing techniques refined for rocket engines found applications in automotive engineering. The guidance systems researched for missiles contributed to industrial robotics development. In this way, the story of Japan's superweapons is not merely a tale of desperate last-ditch efforts in a losing war, but part of a longer technological continuum, one that stretches from the darkest days of conflict to the peaceful economic renaissance that followed. As we reflect on these forgotten weapons programs, perhaps their greatest significance lies not in their military impact, which was minimal, but in what they reveal about human ingenuity in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. They remind us that innovation often flourishes under the most adverse conditions, and that the line between destructive and constructive technology is thinner than we might imagine. The brilliant minds who designed submarine aircraft carriers and rocket-powered interceptors in secret mountain facilities, working with dwindling resources under constant threat of bombing, demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of human creativity. That same innovative spirit, redirected toward peaceful purposes after the war, helped transform Japan from a defeated military power into an economic. Thank you for watching this documentary on Japan's forgotten WWII Superweapons. If you enjoyed this exploration of hidden history, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from Japan's past. Let us know in the comments if there are other aspects of Japanese history you'd like us to cover in future videos.